Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to have Thor Kallestad join us today. He is the CEO of Myno Carbon, and I won't steal his thunder. He can share with you the intention of the business and all about their plans, but a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you are not on mute, please try to remember to put yourself on mute. And if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand and your virtual hand, and I will call on you, or you can put your question in the chat and I'll call on you to ask it. Or if you prefer that I ask it, you can say that in the chat as well. So, and we like this to be fairly interactive, if that's okay with you, Thor. So sometimes the conversation goes on a little bit of tangents, but we always think it's a bit more interesting that way. So I didn't know if you wanted to share any slides, but I have shared the screen now for you if you'd like. And so we'll let you take it from here. Go ahead, Thor.
All right, great. No, thank you everyone for joining the call today. Honored to be here. My name's Thor Kallestad. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Myno Carbon. We're a startup based on Bainbridge Island. Apologies in advance. Some of this might be redundant for some of you, but I figure I'll cover all the ground because I know there are several people on the call who this content might be new to. But we are a startup based on Bainbridge. We're about 1.5 years old, and quick bit of history on what led us to Bainbridge Island is I have to give credit where it's due. My co-founder, the chairman of our company, his name's Tom Caston. Tom is based in Chicago. He's the one who really got us on the trail of this business, kind of networking with Tom about 1.5 years ago. I've known him for a long time. A few of us had exited a previous company that we were involved in, and then just kind of looking for the next sort of startup to do. And it was Tom's idea that really put us on biochar as a very scalable carbon removal technology that would likely see a lot of growth over the decades ahead, just because it has really compelling economics about how to remove carbon. And then one of the big premises on the company really is our mission statement. And I find it very instructive to start with that on introductions and meeting new people and talking about the company, because it really informs how we think, what we're trying to do, and how we look at the world and make decisions, because a lot of this is uncharted territory and we face a lot of business decisions that we grapple with. But all of that comes back to our mission statement for decision making, and that is that we want to sequester as much carbon as we can, as fast as we can, and we want to do it at capital efficient scale. The last part of that is very important, because we want to do big projects. We think that, well, we don't think, we know that a lot of the technologies that we're deploying are well established, but they've really only been done at small scale. And one of the things that we really want to accomplish with our project in Port Angeles is to assemble some of these very proven technologies, do them at a scale where you get economic synergies within it, that it ultimately becomes profitable to sequester and remove carbon. That's kind of the biggest bet, if you will, that we're making as a company. I'll get into our financing, but we're entirely self-funded. This will be an expensive project and we'll be bringing partners into it. But what we're really looking to prove is that it is profitable to sequester carbon, that you can generate good jobs, that people can support a family on, and there's economic activity that results in carbon being drawn down rather than emitted into the atmosphere. A little bit of the background on this is many of you might know some of these numbers, but just generally, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, society has put about 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents into the atmosphere. That's trillion with a T. Before we started the Industrial Revolution, there was about 4 trillion tons. So we've increased that by about 50%, from about atmospheric CO2 levels from about 280 parts per million to about 420 parts per million. Every year, we emit another 50 billion tons just through economic activity in the world. So what really needs to happen is that 50 billion needs to get pulled down to zero on a net basis every year, and then it needs to go carbon negative. Big premise of ours is that climate change is real and this is what's causing it. So we really want to do our part to show that it is profitable and there are good jobs and you can have economic growth by removing carbon from the atmosphere. That's one of the really big things that's held it back thus far. Is it has been expensive to remove carbon from the atmosphere because it's all just been done at small scale. It's what we're looking to show in Port Angeles, that with scale and synergies, the economics will make sense to make a project like this profitable. So that's a little bit on kind of our grand statement philosophy on how we view the world. And just curious, as Colleen said, I'd very much like to make this be an interactive thing rather than me just droning on the whole time. So before I really get into the specifics on Port Angeles, just curious if anybody's got any questions about that kind of our view of sort of the macro world on the climate front and what we're looking to accomplish as a company and why. All right, great. Well, I'll just kind of go right into the Port Angeles plans, but I encourage everyone just interrupt me or get that digital hand in the air if you have a question on stuff. But so what happened with us in Port Angeles and how we wound up in this location is that we were networking with DNR, and DNR introduced me to Bill Herman, and Bill and I got on, very well. He's become a, he's a like-minded, creative, innovative individual in many ways. And I really admire that about him and his ethics. He's just been a terrific kind of guide to get us up to speed on the forest products industry, which a lot of us knew nothing about. Where our backgrounds are oil and gas. We've kind of moved around the world for Schlumberger, BP, some of the large oil companies. But as we were kind of homing in on a location and trying to understand just the forest products business, we got to see that Port Angeles has a lot of very unique qualifications to launch a first business like this, largely in that there's a lot of feedstock up there. And by feedstock, I'm talking the slash piles out in the forest from logging operations. Sawdust is abundant. These are the biomass feedstocks that we're looking to use for our pyrolysis process to make biochar. So we really liked that on the northern part of the Olympic Peninsula, there's an abundant feedstock and not a lot of use for them. So that really helps the economics of the business. And what that business looks like is the rough metrics on it are that we're going to take right now 190,000 dry tons a year of biomass feedstocks. And those are largely going to be three streams. The two biggest are slash piles for wildfire mitigation over the years ahead. We take a few decades long view of the lifespan of this project. So we're going to be relying on slash piles as a feedstock and then sawdust as kind of the two main ones. And to a lesser extent, we'll use some hog fuel, and that's bark and chippings and some of these other things. And been learning some of these terms myself over the last year and a half of launching this business with not being super familiar with it. But we'll be taking a combined total of about 190,000 tons of those feedstocks, running them through a pyrolysis unit that will convert those feedstocks into two primary products. The first of which is biochar. We're going to make about 40,000 tons of biochar a year out of that. And the second is going to be electricity. We're going to make about 75,000 megawatt hours per year out of the plant. And that's going to be, I'd love to talk more, Lindsay, about electric cars. I can get into that a little bit on the narrative here, but that's what we're looking for an end user for the electricity. I can talk more about our revenue model on this and how we're going to go about selling our electricity. But the path to maximum revenue for us is to charge electric vehicles on the electricity side. So talk more about that. But to start out with, I'd like to talk a little bit about the biochar. And this is basically sequestered carbon that stays stable for millennia. It's a very, very, when I first heard about biochar from Tom Caston, who I mentioned previously, I was kind of teasing him. I was like, our startup's going to be making charcoal? I thought there would have to be something more to it than that. But it really, as we got into the economics of it, it's like, okay, yes, this does make a ton of sense for a low cost way to sequester carbon. So with the biochar, there's really kind of five main markets we'll be looking to sell that into. The first and the most mature is for water filtration. It's very well established, good pricing. The product can move quickly into water filtration markets. But longer term, what we would like to do is ultimately get it into the soil. It has great benefits for additional drawdown, water retention, soil health. The biochar itself per se doesn't really do anything directly, but indirectly what it does is it becomes a home for the microbiome. Fungi grow very effectively in this, and those are really the motor for drawdown in the soil. So getting the biochar back into the forest or into agricultural purposes was where we would really like to see most of it deployed over the longer term. That will be slower sales cycles, and there's going to have to be some prove it in that, and we understand that. So as we look at the first batches of biochar coming out of the facility here in Port Angeles, we're thinking now that most of it will probably go to filtration, but as we can find opportunities to get it into the soil, we're going to pursue those earnestly. And I believe in tipping your hand and saying what you want. We can be very concessionary on price for opportunities to get this into soil. We think that's the right long-term strategy for us, given our mission statement, to really start building out those markets. So we'll be looking to sell biochar. We'd like to keep it as close to Port Angeles as possible. The carbon math on these sort of projects is, as we get ranked by a third party that decides it will not be us, nor should it be, determining our carbon score. As a third party looks at this, part of the things that work against us are the diesel emissions that we will burn for doing whatever it is we might do. And that includes hauling biochar to I'm making it up, but to the Southeast United States if it had to go there. So there's a very strong incentive for us to see this be deployed close to the source in Port Angeles. So we're seeing it as very much, the proverbial circular economy approach to it. Regional applications for the biochar is our goal. The electricity, I talked a little bit about electric vehicles earlier. We, with the Climate Commitment Act here in Washington State, the CCA, starting January 1st, 2023, there is a clean fuel standard that goes into effect here in the state of Washington. And that is probably going to be close to a carbon copy in a really good way of California's low carbon fuel standard, the LCFS program that was started down there in 2011. Currently, we are making plans to sell our electricity into the California program. We've had many good discussions with Bonneville, Clallam PUD. We would wheel the electricity down there and sell it into electric vehicle charging stations in California. Our long-term goal is, as soon as that program is up and running in Washington State, we want to pivot and be selling electricity here in the state and keep this as close to home as we possibly can. But just the reality of it right now is that the Washington State program doesn't exist for another roughly 15 months. So we're focused on California for now, but every intention of making this a Washington specific program for us. So it's a little bit on the outlines of the project, kind of the broad strokes of it. We would look to take, again, just kind of a quick recap, and then I'd really like to open it up and hear some questions and just get directed to talk about the things that everyone on the call would like to hear about. But it'll be about 190,000 dry tons a year, sawdust and forest slash primarily to reduce wildfire risk, making biochar and about 75,000 megawatt hours per year of electricity. We'll have about 50 jobs. And as I said earlier, those jobs, to really make the model work and make the scale, those people have to support a family on those jobs. So there's got to be good pay level in there. And then for investors in the project, and that's us, right? We are entirely self-funded, and everybody wants to make a decent return on this. We want to do a lot of good by the carbon math also, but for it to really scale and grow, investors have to make a return. There's really three legs to it. That being the first one, there's got to be good jobs that people want to do. And the third part of this is this has to have a carbon negative character on a net basis. Those are really the three, kind of legs of the proverbial stool, if you will, of what we're looking to demonstrate with this project. And we're extremely confident that all three of those will be realized in Port Angeles, and then we'll be able to grow into other locations. Other places in Washington State here are where we're initially targeting right after the Port Angeles project. So a little bit of the background on the project. Happy to talk more about any of these, any of the topics anyone found relevant or wants to explore further. But again, in the interest of not making this be about me droning on, I'd love to hear some other people with questions and ideas here of what they'd like to know about the project and our plans and who we are.
So Thor, I, as usual, have some questions, if that's okay. So can you describe a little bit more about the pyrolysis process and what will the facility look like? I know you're looking at considering a couple different locations in the Port Angeles area, and so I won't ask you to, delve into that. Just generally, what, you know, what will that facility entail?
Yeah, great. Yeah, good question. So we're close to landing a location. I'll just, I think you kind of leave it at that for now. But what we're looking for is we started the search looking for at least 35 acres. We would like to get more if we can, and we've kind of backed into that area ratio just because of the layout of the facility that Colleen was asking about. What that will generally look like is we will have incoming trucks bringing feedstock into the facility, and then we'll have a feedstock handling area that will be slash, that'll be chipped if it's not, sawdust, etc., and that will run through a pyrolysis unit. We're gonna have two trains. We take that term from our oil and gas days. I think it's appropriate for it, but two main pyrolysis cylinders, if you will, each of which will take about 100,000 dry tons per year. What pyrolysis really is it's high heat and the lack of oxygen in a very simple description of it. And the lack of oxygen is what keeps us from generating much CO2 in the process. So we essentially cook the wood down to its pure form of carbon without having carbon dioxide emissions. What happens on an energy balance basis is about 70% of the energy that's inherent in the wood feedstock is used for drying and pyrolysis and running that process. Once you start the pyrolysis process, the pyrolysis trains will stay at temperature, will run 24/7, and it powers itself. So this 70% of the energy will be used for making biochar and keeping the pyrolytic processes going around the clock. The other 30% comes off in what's loosely referred to as syngas, synthetic gas. And what we'll do with that is that will be burned down to CO2. We can't be completely zero CO2, but we're trying our hardest everywhere we can to keep that number as low as possible. And that will be then used to run a steam powered boiler to generate. It's a 10 megawatts of rated capacity, and with our uptime, et cetera, that's how we kind of solve for that 75,000 megawatt hours per year number that will be coming out of it. And then what we'll do for the carbon math of this is, again, there's third parties where we will get source tested on the emissions stack coming out of this to see how much carbon that we generate, and that will, and as it should, work against us in our carbon credit math as we go about running the project.
Okay, so we have several questions in the chat for you. So first off, Louis, do you want to ask? And then Francesco, I'm sorry. You can ask after that, Louis?
Yeah, when are you going to start construction? Have you come up with a date yet?
Yeah, great. You can kind of walk through our timeline on stuff. We are happy to just kind of talk about finances and everything else on this. I figure that question will get asked, so maybe address it too right now while I talk about the timeline, because they're interrelated. We've raised 830 grand amongst ourselves total out of putting into the project of our own money, and we're using that for engineering design right now. We're working with a third-party engineering firm, and we are preparing to go to procurement at the end of Q1 to order the pyrolysis trains, the electrical generation kit, et cetera. We'll make a final decision on land here in the next few weeks of where the location is going to be for this. Finish engineering over the rest of Q4 and into Q1 next year, procurement beginning at the end of Q1. Probably a year in reality of getting everything on location and rigged up and ready to go. First production, we're targeting for October 2023. That being both biochar and electricity production. So we're roughly a 2-year timeline between right now and standing up the facility. The total capital required for this is going to be about $100 million. So Where that's going to come from is really a mix of debt and equity. We're in discussions right now with, I'll just name it BP. We've got, deep connections to BP in our oil and gas background to sell the electricity to them, and how that will work. And I don't know that it will be them, but they're happy with me talking about this. And we sell it to somebody else if not, but we get a 20-year PPA to sell the electricity, and then that will allow us to secure a rather large debt facility to fund a good bit of that $100 million of the project. And then the remaining piece of the equity above and beyond what we've been funding as a team thus far will come from as one of several VCs that we are currently in discussion with on the project right now. So no real concerns about funding it. We're also looking at just state programs that might make sense for us. We would really like to be in a very productive way, encourage the Climate Commitment Act and the supporting programs along with that, and utilize these things and show that these sort of public-private partnerships can work. But that's a little bit on kind of our timeline and our financing as how we're looking at getting the project up and running here.
Okay, thanks, Louis. Good question. Francesco, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Jim, thank you for, Thor, thank you so much for the presentation and for your scope here. I thought I heard you say that there were 3 items for use for the biochar. You mentioned water filtration and soil. Was there anything else?
Yeah, so there's actually, biochar, yeah, I'll talk about the markets a little bit. It's a great question. So biochar has right now been very, low production amounts, a lot of people doing it, but kind of, backyard hobbyists, per se. So what we've done over the last kind of year and a half of this is taking kind of, just a fresh organic look at, what are the markets for, biochar? What are these and how we've segmented these as a company. And early days market analyses, I acknowledge readily, reasonable minds can disagree on how best to look at the segments on stuff, but we look at it in 5 segments. Water filtration, talked a good bit about. That's probably the most mature, highest margin, quickest, easiest to access. Biochar is a great substitute for activated charcoal. Activated charcoal is very expensive. A lot of it comes from anthracite coal. We just have a much better carbon footprint and value proposition to sell into water filtration markets. So that's one of the 5 that we're looking at right away. Kind of the longer term one, there's 3 soil ones I'll talk about, but the longer term one is concrete and asphalt. We would like to be in those also in the building materials. There's a lot of research and a lot of very bright people looking at those markets for biochar as a replacement for aggregate to try and reduce cement consumption on that. A lot of science, a lot of interesting things happening there. We think that one's the furthest out for us to look at. Kind of the 3 other segments all do involve soil, and we're looking at those 3. That this is what we'd really like to get into the most, because getting it into the soil has these additional climate benefits through improved soil health, microbiome being able to thrive a bit better, that putting it in filtration and materials just do not. Those 3 soil markets are agribusiness. We look at it, and that's farming, feeding it to livestock, manure management, odor control, these sort of things in the agribusiness sector. The second of those 3 with soil is forestry. We would love to, we see a lot of natural synergies between a truck hauls the slash pile out of the forest, and when it's empty to go back to get more, it's hauling biochar back out there to get into the forest to improve water retention in the soils and drought resistance of the larger ecosystem. So we would love to get that one, figured out here, because it just makes abundant sense to us there. And again, I believe in tipping your hand about this. We can be pretty concessionary on making that happen because it's very important to us. The third of the soil markets of our 5 is really turf, homes, lawns, gardens, golf courses, these sort of things. We'd like to also get it into those. We see that more of a retail kind of direct sales approach, but those are the 5 markets that as we look at it, there's filtration, and then there's materials, kind of the 2 of the 5 that are non-soil. And then as we look at it, it's agribusiness, it's forestry, and then it's homes and gardens and lawns and golf courses and that sort of stuff.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Patricia has a question.
Did I hear you right? Did you say 75,000 megawatts?
Yes, 75,000 megawatt hours per year that we would generate. The rated capacity is going to be about 10 megawatts. And then when we think our utilization ratio is going to be about 85%, we're hoping for higher, but just the reality of something's going to break and we're going to have to be down for maintenance. And that kind of then all solves out for roughly that many megawatt hours per year.
Okay, so you're not selling 75,000 megawatts to California. You're selling more like 2 megawatts.
We would sell all of the megawatt hours, into EV charging stations is what we would look to do with the PPA. And again, we want this in Washington State just as soon as the program is ready. It might be a bit of a tangent, but happy to talk a little bit about how these EV charging programs work. But we think it's the right use of the electricity. But that would be, we would sell roughly 75,000 megawatt hours every year to whoever we ultimately agree that PPA with.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bo Brown has a really good question. Bo. I don't see him come. Oh, go ahead, Bo.
Yeah, no, I had stepped out and then I heard my name. Yeah, Bo Brown, I was just wondering about the skill level and requirements for those 50 jobs that are coming to the area. What kind of education or training are needed?
Yeah, we would see us having Myno a very robust training program. And one of the great things about it is Impact Washington. And these are some of the great programs we've been trying to understand that we might have access to. Would really help with the training of that too, of funding these. So I want to give a lot of credit as we go about our fundraising strategy to some of these in-state programs to help with that. But for the training programs, what we would see the jobs looking like is there will be facility engineering jobs. We would also see a good bit of sales and marketing jobs. And one of the if anybody knows somebody who looks, it would be a perfect profile for this, I'd love to hire kind of, somebody, the super sharp marketing, social media, online, we're kind of, 6 months away from that, but that sort of, there'll be all manner of different jobs coming into this. And we want to, it's one of the 3 key cogs of the stool is that, these all are good jobs and good paying and people want to do them and be a part of a business like this in order for it to grow. So we would have, mainly facility jobs, but then also, a good bit of sales and marketing on the downstream biochar channels close to home that we would like to pursue.
Great. Craig Fulton has a question.
Yeah, great discussion here. A question that's come up within the city many times, and I've been intimately familiar with it, is what to do with the biosolids from the sewage treatment plant. And there are questions when there was another biochar process that was discussed many years ago, is can these biosolids be used in the biochar process to remove the sewage treatment plant solids that way rather than converting into compost? I mean, it has lots of nutrients in it, but it could have other chemicals in the biosolids. And so is that an opportunity to add biosolids to the your woody debris?
It is, and this has been brought to our attention in the Port Angeles community about these biosolids, and we're in process of taking a real deep dive, hard look at this. Some of the trade-offs on dealing with biosolids. Short answer is we want to be able to take those. We think right now that the temperatures that we're going to be using for pyrolysis are going to be too low for the biosolids for proper and effective treatment of those. We're looking at roughly between 450 and 650 degrees Celsius for our pyrolysis temperatures. It's our understanding. We incidentally looked at a wastewater treatment project up in Anchorage when we were first getting going as a company for biosolids up there. And what we realized from that is it needs to be a significantly higher temperature for biosolids to be able to make sure that PFAS and PFOA, and I'm not an air emissions expert, but I gather that these are contaminants that do get emitted if pyrolytic processes for biosolids are too low. So we've got kind of a temperature concern that we're trying to get to the bottom of. There's also, we are restricted for our feedstock type in order to get carbon credits or one of the revenue streams on this project. And will be to just quickly get into some technical details on it, there's something called the Vera protocol that's coming out that kind of guides how these standards around carbon credits are going to be done. And you can't mix feedstocks. Just one of the things within that Vera. So what we would have to do is a batch processing of it. So we're looking at how to do a batch process of the biosolids and to be able to have a temperature that does not cause air emissions. So I've got it on my to-do list to follow up about some of these topics with the city. But this is one of the things we're looking. We'd love to make it work. The synergies on it. If we for some reason cannot, we've got some pretty creative ideas that we want to come back to the community with to consider about what might be a very cost-effective way to treat those biosolids for you.
All right, thank you much.
Sure.
Peggy has a question.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for coming here this morning. I have a question. You talked a little bit about some of the technical positions that you're going to have. Are you going to have like less technical, like office, clerical, equipment operators to move stuff around? Are you going to have some of those kinds of jobs as well?
We will. Yep. We'll have a good few of those without having the exact, job profile, sort of pinned down. What I would think is that, just kind of find it useful to not duck these sort of things. I would think it's probably about 10-ish kind of roles roughly in that sort of capacity, maybe, 20-ish on kind of on the facility. I'd say probably 30-ish on the facility orientation, because that'll be a 24/7 thing. So, there'll be, that will just by necessity need more jobs. And then I'd say we're probably looking at kind of 10-ish jobs on more kind of the sales, marketing, office kind of, corporate, running of the thing. So roughly what I would think is kind of the breakdown of that might look like.
Thank you.
Sure.
Lee has a question on emissions. Go ahead, Lee.
Hi, thank you. Tor, so what are the typical air emissions that come from a process like this? And what about water pollution?
Yeah, no, great question. So we will, so it kind of leads to, I'll just talk a little bit about these, this LCFS program in California and the Clean Fuel Standard program that will be coming to Washington State in about 15 months, because air emissions are a big part of that. Of essentially what happens is that we, over the process of generating electricity, will sequester carbon. It'll be carbon negative electricity that we will generate. And depending on how much carbon we sequester, guides how much extra tradable credits that we get on these LCFS markets. Happy to talk about the marketplace for these credits, but it all ties back to the carbon math of how carbon negative the process is to generate the electricity, and that will really be driven by two things. It'll be how much carbon we sequester on the feedstock coming in, and then how much CO2 goes up the stack for generating the electricity. So how it works is that we will have an annual assessment. I suspect Washington State's will be exactly like this, but how California's work is that there are 22 different certified inspectors with the state of California that do these emissions testing. So they will come and source test the stack on this and see what the emissions level is coming out of it. And as some of you might know, this all generally gets converted to a CO2 equivalent, which basically equalizes various greenhouse gases according to their radiative heat trapping capabilities. So we would like to burn everything down to CO2. For instance, if you have methane come up, and we're going to be avoiding this at all costs, because methane is, I think, something like 25 times as potent of a greenhouse gas as CO2 from just that equivalence point on radiative heat trapping. So we are keenly focused on this issue to minimize any emissions that come out of that, because it will, as it should, hurt us on the carbon math. I see a hand. I'm not, it looks like Garrett.
Yeah, thank you for the good presentation. I am curious if I'm tracking right. Slash is one of your main feedstocks that you guys are planning on. And I'm wondering where your assumptions are sitting for that, where that falls in your cost or revenue column. So are you planning on buying it, assuming you're going to get it for free? Who pays the transport? Because lumber and timber industry have looked at biochar before and nobody's jumped at it. So I'm just trying to think through those costs a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And again, in the spirit of, believing and always, tipping the hand, and, I just find it instructive to say how we're thinking about this stuff. So we originally were thinking we would largely be using sawdust as a feedstock. And what we've kind of picked up on is, well, we think unfortunately the climate's going to continue to dry out here over the decades ahead, and there will continue to be more burn bans, and there will continue to be more concern about slash piles being left in the forest. So we think that over the decades ahead, and we just kind of feel it from some of our various discussions, that the need to get those slash piles out of the forest is going to become, it's palpable everywhere we talk. We think that's going to become more and more of a prioritized feedstock for us. It is more expensive than sawdust and some of these other feedstocks that we're looking at, just for a lot of obvious having to go out in the forest and get it kind of reasons. So our view on that, and again, I brought up a view on being concessionary on some of these prices, is that we think it's just our view that, longer term, there's a larger bargain between us, some of the private forest companies, possibly DNR, but what's the just most optimal strategy to get this out of the forest? We understand that it's a higher cost feedstock, but we see a lot of value in getting that out for all the wildfire risk mitigation reasons. And another thing that's kind of interesting is just, sharing it. So, how we think about the world is those slash piles, if they stay in the forest and are left to just decompose naturally, they do give off a lot of methane. If you burn them down, it's a lot of CO2, which is is not as bad of a greenhouse gas as methane. So we think from a greenhouse gas point of view, it's worse to let them just decompose than burn them down. But we understand completely the wildfire risk about keeping them from being burnt down. So just a little bit of background, that as that kind of methane awareness kind of takes hold about those piles decomposing and then the risk of leaving them there for fire, we think we're going to see a real push to get those out. And we would just like to be a real, constructive participant in those discussions on how those costs are shared. We would anticipate absolutely paying for these things, whether, that's transportation costs. Part of it, we would hope that some of the private companies would be willing to bear some of that cost with us for the benefits of getting those out there. But we do see that as, kind of as a longer term thing that we want to, constructively move towards a real good way, the proverbial win-win-win solution for everybody involved to get those out, because we think there's just a ton of reason to be using that as the primary feedstock for biochar for us. So we'd like to get there, but we recognize some of the cost challenges on it.
Yeah, so Garrett is with the Nature Conservancy out in the Forks area.
Oh, great.
Bruce Beckett.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. This has been fascinating. I kind of maybe following up a little bit on the theme that Garrett asked. If you're going to be using slash piles or debris from logging operations, that's kind of predicated on, a certain level of that activity going on. And it's an industry that's known to fluctuate. Do you have a sense of what you need from a timber harvesting standpoint level of activity in the region to support your business?
I don't say this lightly, but I know there's more feedstock out there than we'll ever need. And even at just, existing levels of operation, our biggest concern, I'd mentioned 35 acres earlier on the size of the plot we're looking for. As we've felt more and more of the concern around these slash piles, I'd love to have a lot more than 35 acres, because we do really think that, we'll have to add another one of these process trains alongside it over time. We think, the economics will kick in where it's going to make sense to do that. So we'd like to have the space to be able to bring in another 100,000, dry tons a year for a third pyrolysis train. But not at all worried about the volume of feedstock out there. I have learned, I've heard it from everybody I've talked to, that the industry is cyclical, and we should be prepared for, highs and lows on feedstock cost, availability, and logistics. So we've been planning for, to your question, Garrett, we've made some intereconomic modeling around it. We've made some very high cost assumptions on feedstock, much higher than it can be had for today, but just also to the other, one of the three legs of what we're looking to accomplish. And investors in this got to make a real good return. So we've used some really cautious and conservative assumptions on our modeling of how we're looking at the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Bruce, I'd like to add that we had a stakeholders meeting a month or more ago, and there were a lot of forest owners there, and and also Bill and Mike Herman. And the resounding feedback we got was there is plenty of feedstock. There is lots of waste wood out in our forests and from, the different resources, I guess, that they're looking at pulling from. So it's just a matter of getting it to the plant site. Yeah. So Colleen Robinson, one of my board members. Colleen.
Yeah, I was wondering, part of the a two-part question, which you've answered about staffing, but if you're bringing specialists from outside of the area, I represent Habitat for Humanity. I'm wondering if you're looking into opportunities for trailing spouses and what your thoughts are on the lack of housing for people you'll be bringing from out of the area.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, this has to be a job that people can support a family on and be happy doing it. So as we're bringing people into the location, it's not just one person. We would like, it's something else that really appeals to us about Port Angeles, is we think it's going to be a really, compelling area for people to want to relocate to the extent we need to bring people in. We do believe we're going to be able to find most of the new hires we need organically in the area. So I don't know that housing, I admittedly don't know much about the housing landscape out there, but I'm not suspecting it's going to be a really big problem for us, just largely because we want to hire locally to the maximum possible extent.
Howard. Thanks, Colleen. Howard has a question.
Yeah, we have a biomass energy plant at the mill here in town that produces steam plus power. Have you been engaging them, and does this affect your business plan?
No, we haven't engaged them. We see that they're taking a little bit of a different process for us than what we're planning to do, of largely burning hog fuel to run a steam powered boiler rather than the pyrolysis process that we're looking to do. So we see it as just, I mean, in a really good way, just another kind of unrelated project that they've got their feedstock and they're generating their electricity and you're doing their thing there. And we're just looking at having a little bit of a different process. But I would love to, it's on our to-do list to get to know them and interact with the mill a little bit, because I understand that they're, selling excess power too. And we would, to the extent they would like to, I'd love to have just a really constructive conversation with them down the line here about our plans, maybe learn from some of the things that they've experienced along the way in doing that, and share some of our plans with them. But right now we look at it that just as a kind of a separate project from us, where our area focus has largely been on assessing the feedstock capabilities in the area, got real comfortable with that, and then now kind of pinning our location here in the next few weeks and moving on through engineering and scale up here.
Thank you.
So thanks, Howard. Next is Deaver from the DNR Clean Energy Program Manager. Great that you're on, and hopefully I'm going to ask that you put your email address in the chat, and I'll make sure that Thor gets your contact information, Deaver.
Sure, happy to. So hi, I'm Deborah Hafner-Ratliff with the Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Clean Energy Program Manager, as I was just introduced. And one of the things we're working on is looking at how we can best offer our slash from whether it's maintenance trimmings or timber sales or anything like that to companies such as yours. And so I'm wondering if you can speak more to what you're looking for in terms of a supply chain, in terms of quantity, geographic area, if there's any criteria. And you're also just welcome to email me and talk offline if you're interested. That'd be great.
That's excellent. I'll definitely do that to follow up with you and get a kind of separate conversation to get into really some of the details on it, because we do think that, again, over the decades ahead, slash is going to become more and more a part of our feedstock. So we're designing the facility with that in mind, maximum flexibility on feedstock capabilities, and then also just biochar, specifications, if you will, coming out the back end of it. But to the slash, one of the things that I'm sorry, I forget, I think it was maybe Garrett that asked earlier on the cost part of it is, the more accessible it is to the road, clearly the cheaper it's going to be, for us to get, rather than, going into the woods for it. But and that then would also extend the economic radius, if you will, around the facility at which we could, reach out to get it. We don't, again, to our economic planning, we've assumed some really high numbers on feedstock just to kind of vet the viability of the business model here. As a longer term goal, we don't mind paying a little bit more for feedstock to really prove the viability of this for green slash. We think that's going to be a very, very valuable thing to do for us and all other stakeholders around it, to show that this slash can be used for purposes that generate a lot of value while reducing wildfire risk. So to the extent there's available slash around the area, we would like to be able to incorporate that into our initial feedstock matrix. So, love to find out more about, getting our hands on some of that for you, Deborah, and showing how we can do this.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. And sorry, I butchered your name there. Reed had a question.
Sorry about that. It took me a second to unmute myself. So I'm Reed Wendell. I'm Vice President of Green Crow. We're a industrial forest owner here in Port Angeles. Going into slash burning season right now, and it's always a stressful time to know if I'm going to be able to light my piles or not with air quality standards and air quality permits. We spend quite a bit of money, thousands of dollars just on our permits, not including the costs of burning. So I'm all for finding other ways to get rid of slash besides burning, and especially in areas where we have sort of a forest urban interface and we have neighbors that get concerned about air quality and fire risk. It's really helpful to have Herman Brothers that grinds already, and to expand that program would be great. One thing I'm just curious about, I want the program to be successful, and it's a substitute for a method of generating electricity that doesn't emit many greenhouse gases, which we rely on hydropower right now. So what I was wondering about is, how does the greenhouse gas emission compare with burning fossil fuels versus pyrolysis?
Yeah. So significantly less than fossil fuels. In this goes, it's a great, gosh, try and do this in a minute or two on kind of the highlights of it, but it goes to this issue in carbon math of double counting, if you will, in that as we directly sequester carbon in our biochar, that's something that a third party could come out and measure. How much biochar we made, what's the carbon content, we get a certain carbon credit for that. To the double counting and the emissions around electricity, there is also an avoided emissions that will occur if we're using those slash piles. Of those would decompose into how much methane, or whatever it third party determines it is. Through taking that in, we will avoid those avoided emissions. The carbon that was in our biochar would be part of those avoided emissions had it all stayed out in the field. So that it kind of goes to this double counting thing of, of course you can't, double dip on the numbers. So there gets to be this carve up between how much was directly sequestered and then, how much is left over that would have been avoided for the emissions. So for the electricity generation part of it, of how they look at the scoring on this, is that we will generate some CO2 up that stack when we're burning our syngas, but then that will be corrected against, if you will, how much the residual amount that would have gone up in emissions from that slash pile had it decayed. And then that will lead us to some net negative number on our carbon signature, because the amount that would have gone up from the decay of those slash piles would be greater than the amount of CO2. That's how the math will work. So we would still have a negative score on our electricity, which drives a lot of these clean fuel standard programs that we're looking to get into. But I just kind of bring that background math up on it because it leads to a carbon negative electricity, which is in clear difference to fossil fuels, which do generate a good bit of through burning coal, gas, or oil, whatever it might be, does emit a lot of CO2.
So thank you, Thor. Patricia had another question. Patricia.
Yes. No, I think I got that answered. Thank you, Colleen.
Okay.
This Patricia. It's Patty Morris.
Oh, go ahead, Patty.
Sorry. I put a note in. I've assisted on a few biofuel biomass projects. And one of the things we learned was slash contractors had long-term contracts with suppliers, and it was difficult to find reliable supply. Also, the quality of slash, because many types of the wood is too stringy and wet, and they can't guarantee what type of wood is being in the slash. Has there been any discussion on that?
Yeah, no, this is great. Thanks for bringing it up, Patty. Yeah, we've been coached and taught very clearly that there's going to be a lot of variability and the cyclical nature of these feedstocks and costs and where they come from, and not all slash is created the same into the various species out there. So, and we're grateful for having had that education early days on it, because it's really gone into our engineering design of, as we tried to figure out, how we wanted to build this thing. We all eventually just, I say it in a, kind of laugh at ourselves way. We all just, realize this is unknowable, what the future is going to hold on all of this different stuff. So we just have to design max flexibility into being able to take the full gamut of different feedstocks that we make. And that also goes to our 5 markets view of biochar. Is soil biochar is going to be, you're going to need different specifications than filtration biochar. So we've consciously been building those engineering capabilities into the process flow to be able to accommodate this.
Have you talked to Rod Fleck at all? Because he has considerable knowledge on this, considerable.
I have not, but I would welcome the opportunity to do that. Or the more we can learn, the better, is definitely our view on these things.
He would be a great resource.
Rod just had to jump off for a city attorney conference, but I will make sure that I make that direct introduction. Yeah, they have he is a forestry expert and has served on Green Crow's board, and they have their own biomass boiler, I guess, out in Forks, and they've done a lot of research on this particular subject, not to create biochar, but more so energy. And so let's see, further questions. Yeah, it looks like, does anyone have any follow-up questions at this point? I don't see those anymore. Looks like we do, maybe. Mona. Oh, has to jump off to another meeting. So
sorry about that. I am
okay.
Excited about learning more. This is very interesting to me.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mona.
Take care.
All right.
And Dever, can you share a little bit more about what DNR's plans are for their slash?
Sure, happy to. Right now, we are in the planning stages. We currently only have one contract for our forest residuals that's going to a plant, and that's in the Olympic Peninsula area. So we are actually currently essentially doing business development and internal product development for that, looking at projects such as this one to identify how we can best meet the needs of the industry supply chain. Typically, we're looking at auctioning and short-term sales specific to a specific trimming or timber harvest, but we know that's not always what's needed in the industry, right? There's some stability and long-term contracts that are more ideal. And so in my role, this is specifically and exactly what I'm looking at when it comes to this is how do we take our requirements as a state agency and our obligation to earn money for the trusts that then fund things like K through 12 schools, while at the same time meeting industry needs. And so right now we're doing a lot of information collecting and outreach to, such as this presentation, to see what we can learn to then integrate that into our processes. As we have in the short term, as we have timber harvest, especially, we're going to be looking at essentially one-off sales in response to that timber harvest until we get to a point of having a more standardized and streamlined process.
Great. I would think and from what I've heard from industry folks that are hoping to buy product from DNR, longer term, especially if it's specialty products, kind of longer term contracts, so that there is very clear reliability for the supply is of great value. And especially if there aren't a lot of competing entities for it, that is always better typically for the industry sector. Don't mean to speak on your behalf, Thor, but if it's just one, if you're bidding on just a few piles and that kind of thing, that just adds, I think, a lot of administration burden for DNR and for the industry purchasing side as well.
Yeah, we'll fall into that same category, to the extent it's possible. And I know it is cyclical. We'd love to be looking at, kind of long-term or long-term alignment and arrangements is a really key thing for us on all of this.
Mm-hmm. So can you share a little bit, Thor? We just have it's 9 o'clock, but my last question, you'll be selling energy, you'll be selling carbon credits or offsets, and then you'll be selling the actual biochar product. Have you established what percentage of your revenues will be coming from those three revenue lines?
Yeah, no, this is something why we're, pretty excited about the business is that, biochar itself, especially if we sell pretty heavily into the filtration market, which has really strong pricing in it, biochar itself sales could support the project, get us to break even status. We don't want to do this, but if we gave the biochar away for free, the electricity sales could support the whole project. So we like that we've got two motors for this that can make it work for us. The reason why electricity is expensive is, it's clearly cheap up here in the Northwest because of Bonneville and the hydropower, which was mentioned earlier. But it's charging these electric vehicles in these clean fuel standards, and the LCFS in California is broadly the more carbon negative your electricity becomes, the more credits that you get, these clean fuel standard credits, which are sold openly. It's a $4 billion market in California. Very, very transparent exchange that the state runs. Washington State will be doing the same thing here. But the idea, and we're comfortable making a bet on this, that this is here to stay. The idea is that the transportation fleet generates just a lot of emissions. And if you can get the carbon intensity of the transportation fleet down, that's the easiest way to make a material reduction in emissions. And how California did that, and Oregon has copied it, as has British Columbia, and Washington will soon, is the state basically mandates that a carbon intensity of a fuel needs to be X and it's declining at this rate. And everybody knows that's what it is. So the easiest way to lower that is to everybody switch to electric vehicles. I know that's a long process. It's expensive. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is just a way for the state to put, I would argue, good pressure on making that transition happen somewhat quickly. So if you sell carbon negative electricity to charge electric vehicles, you still are only going to get a market rate for your electricity, whatever that might be. But the incremental carbon credits that wind up coming out of the process really make the revenue a pretty lucrative, or the electricity a pretty lucrative revenue stream for us also. So we took a long, hard look at the right thing to do with the syngas, the 30% excess heat, and just decided on electricity as the right use for the economics.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think just really want to say thank you, heartfelt thank you to you for joining us, and especially selecting Clallam County as a location to be your launching off point for your business. We're so excited and happy to have an innovative business like this coming to Clallam County. So thank you from everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.